Cartagena, 1843. A city of stone and secrets where the Caribbean sun baked the streets until they shimmered with heat and desperation. This is the story of a widow who built her life on control, a daughter who dared to love, and an enslaved man who learned that knowledge could be the deadliest weapon of all. This is the story of how desire, power, and betrayal collided in one house, and how the woman who thought she controlled everything lost it all in a single night. Doña Eloísa Villamizar wasn't born into wealth, she married into it. When she was 22, she became the wife of Don Fernando, a merchant 20 years her senior who owned plantations, warehouses, and 47 enslaved people. It wasn't a love match, it was business. And Eloísa understood business. When Don Fernando died 3 years ago, he left her everything: 600 acres of land, a fortune in gold and jewels, a house in the center of Cartagena with balconies overlooking the plaza, and a daughter named Isabel who was now 20 years old and, in Eloísa's mind, dangerously close to ruining everything. Eloísa wore black, always black. The mourning clothes weren't just for her dead husband. They were armor against gossip, against envy, against the whispers that followed widows in a city where reputation was everything. She sat on her balcony every afternoon, fanning herself with slow, precise movements, watching the plaza but never participating in it. Her world had shrunk to two obsessions: maintaining decency and finding Isabel a suitable husband. Isabel, however, had other plans. At 20, she had the beauty of a tropical flower and the spirit of a wild horse. While her mother dreamed of marrying her off to a wealthy merchant from Santa Marta, Isabel dreamed of the sea, of freedom, of anything that wasn't the golden cage of her mother's house. The two women lived under the same roof, but they inhabited different worlds. And then there was Mateo. Mateo wasn't a decoration in the Villamizar house. He was its foundation. He was the principal enslaved man, a position that meant he managed the household, drove the cart, kept the minor accounts, and served at the table when important visitors arrived. He'd been purchased by Don Fernando years ago, brought from the interior, and had proven himself invaluable. He was 25 years old, strong, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of the coast. To Doña Eloísa, Mateo was property. Expensive property, yes, but property nonetheless. A tool, an investment. She never looked at him the way you look at a man. But her daughter Isabel did. And Mateo, despite keeping his head down and his eyes lowered, sometimes looked back. They were seconds, nothing more. But those seconds were like the heavy air before a storm. Eloísa noticed that Isabel spent too much time in the back courtyard, supposedly supervising the laundry or helping the cook. But Tia Clara, the elderly cook, had started whispering things Eloísa didn't want to hear, words about glances that shouldn't happen, about silences that lasted too long. One night, the heat was unbearable. It was the kind of heat that steals your breath and glues the sheets to your body. Eloísa couldn't sleep. She got up, lit a small oil lamp, and decided to go downstairs to drink cool water from the clay jar. The silence in the house was profound, broken only by the distant sound of waves and the croaking of frogs in the garden. Eloísa walked barefoot across the cold tile floor. As she approached the entrance to the service courtyard, she noticed something wrong. The door, which should always be locked after 10 o'clock, was ajar. Her heart lurched, not from fear of thieves, but from fear of what negligence meant. Who had dared to disobey her orders? She approached slowly, the lamp trembling slightly in her hand. She peered through the opening, expecting to see Tia Clara sleeping in a corner or some careless servant. What she saw froze her in place. The moonlight, that fat and treacherous tropical moon, illuminated the darkest corner of the courtyard just behind the well. And there they were. Her daughter Isabel, the flower of her house, the girl who represented the future of her honor, was nestled with Mateo, the enslaved man. Isabel wasn't crying or struggling. She was there by her own will, her young body pressed against his, whispering something Eloísa couldn't hear but didn't need to hear. Isabel's head rested on Mateo's shoulder, and he held her with a tenderness the widow had never seen in him. a tenderness that an enslaved man had no right to feel, much less to show. Doña Eloísa's world split in two. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The air had caught in her throat. The lamp nearly fell from her hands. She retreated from the door with the same slowness with which she'd arrived, as if fearing that the slightest noise could unleash a catastrophe. She returned to her room, not running, but dragging her feet as if they were made of lead. She closed the door without making a sound, sat on the edge of her bed, and set the lamp on the nightstand. The light danced, casting long, nervous shadows on the walls. Her mind, which had always been so orderly, was now a whirlpool of poison and mud. Dishonor. That was the first word that echoed. Dishonor for the family, for the late Fernando. Her daughter had fallen to the lowest level, to the forbidden mixture, to the betrayal that had no forgiveness before God or men, and Mateo. What would she do with Mateo? In that instant, her first instinct was the brutality that the law permitted. Have him whipped until he couldn't stand, sell him to the plantations of the interior, far from the coast, where the work would kill him slowly. He was her property. She could do whatever she wanted. But then, as cold sweat soaked her nightgown, a second emotion, more dangerous and strange than anger, forced its way into her chest. It was a feeling that had been buried under years, of mourning and rigid virtue, envy. Staring into the darkness of her own room, she felt the echo of the tenderness she'd seen in the courtyard. The way Mateo held Isabel wasn't the possession of a man over a woman, but the connection of two souls seeking refuge. Doña Eloísa hadn't been embraced in 3 years. Her marriage to Fernando had been one of convenience, of business, of respect, but never of burning passion. And since he died, her bed was a desert. She touched her chest, felt her racing pulse. The idea was so monstrous she almost laughed out loud. Her daughter had betrayed her, yes, but in doing so, she had shown her a door that Eloísa didn't even know existed, a door to desire that society had taught her to bury. If she punished Isabel, she would destroy her. If she punished Mateo, she would lose a valuable slave and, worse, condemn her daughter to perpetual emotional misery. And if she made a scandal, the Villamizar name would be dragged through the mud of Cartagena. No, scandal wasn't an option. She had to be silent, she had to be intelligent, and she had to be ruthless, but not with them. She had to be ruthless with the rules that had suffocated her all her life. She stood up again, this time with an icy determination that hadn't been seen on her face since the day she signed the inheritance papers. She walked to the mirror. She looked at herself, the widow in black, the owner of the house, the guardian of morality. But on this night, Doña Eloísa felt that she no longer wanted to guard morality. She wanted something more. She asked herself with a shiver that wasn't fear, but anticipation, what would she do now? How would she handle this time bomb that was the forbidden passion between her daughter and her slave? And the answer that came to her mind was slow, calculated, and profoundly disturbing. If she couldn't destroy the passion, maybe she could control it. If Isabel had found comfort in Mateo's arms that were strong and not bound by the social conventions of Cartagena's decent men, why couldn't she find it too? Mateo was hers. He was her property. And if her daughter was using him, she, the owner, had every right to claim what was hers. But it wouldn't be a punishment. It would be an arrangement. A shared secret that would bind the two of them, mother and daughter, in an unthinkable complicity. Doña Eloísa returned to bed but didn't sleep. She spent the rest of the night planning. Morning in Cartagena arrived like a hammer blow, hard and merciless. The sun rose over the sea and began to bake the stone streets. Doña Eloísa, dressed in her impeccable morning clothes, sat at the breakfast table but didn't touch a bite. The coffee grew cold in her cup. She had no dark circles under her eyes. Her face was tense with that cold pallor that only people who have made a terrible and irreversible decision possess. Isabel came down to breakfast with the mask of youth. She was a little quieter than normal, but Eloísa attributed that to the exhaustion of her nocturnal adventure. The widow watched her daughter with a new and dangerous clarity. She saw her slender neck, the way her hair curled with the humidity. Her daughter was beautiful, yes, and that beauty had led her to ruin. When they finished, Doña Eloísa fanned herself slowly and gave the first order of the day. "Tia Clara, I need you to take all the servants except Mateo to the market. Buy provisions for the week and don't return before noon. Take your time." Once the courtyard was empty, except for the buzzing of flies and the dense heat, Eloísa addressed Isabel. "Isabel, come to my study now. It wasn't an invitation, it was an order." Isabel felt a chill. The widow never used the study. Entering there was a sign that serious trouble was coming. Isabel entered. The study was a dark, cool room, smelling of old paper and stale tobacco from the deceased. She stood in front of the desk, trying to appear innocent. "What's happening, mother?" Doña Eloísa sat behind the desk. The leather of the chair creaked slightly. She joined her hands on the polished wood and looked her daughter directly in the eyes without a trace of emotion. "Don't look at me with those innocent eyes, Isabel. Not anymore. Last night the heat wouldn't let me sleep. I went down to drink water." Isabel paled instantly. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew exactly what her mother was going to say. Fear paralyzed her. "I saw the courtyard door ajar," Eloísa continued. Her voice was a dangerous whisper. "And I saw what I shouldn't have seen, my daughter. I saw you with Mateo." The air became unbreathable. Isabel shrank, expecting the scream, the slap, the hysteria, but the scream never came. Doña Eloísa maintained her icy composure. "Don't cry," she said, anticipating Isabel's tears. "Crying won't clean your dishonor or my name." Isabel, trembling, finally found her voice. "Mother, I love him." The widow almost laughed, but restrained herself. "Love, Isabel, is an invention of poets for women who don't have to worry about food on the table. What you felt last night is a betrayal, an act of madness that, if known, destroys us both." "Do you know what this means?" Eloísa leaned forward. Her eyes were two black wells. "It means the Villamizar name will be dragged through the mud. It means no decent man will want to marry you. It means you'll be a pariah. And I, your mother, will be the widow who couldn't control her daughter." Isabel sobbed, bringing her hands to her face. "Punish me, mother. Do what you must, but not him." "Ah, not him." Eloísa smiled, but it was a smile without joy, sharp as a knife. "Mateo is my property. I can do with him whatever I please. I can sell him today to a sugar plantation on the Magdalena, where he'll work until he dies. Or I can have him whipped until he forgets the tenderness he showed you last night." Isabel knelt before the desk, pleading. "No, please, mother, have mercy." "Mercy," repeated Eloísa, savoring the word. "Mercy is a luxury we can't afford, but silence is. And silence has a price, Isabel." The widow stood, walked to the window, and looked at the courtyard. "Your mistake is unforgivable, but your punishment won't be what you expect." She returned to the desk and tapped the wood gently with the tip of her closed fan. "Now get up and do me a favor, call Mateo. Tell him I need him here immediately." Isabel, confused and terrified, wiped her tears and left the study like an automaton. Minutes later, Mateo entered. He came from the stable, and the smell of leather and sweat was strong. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew the widow had summoned him privately, and that was never a good sign. "Good morning, Doña Eloísa." "Good morning, Mateo," she replied, and the tone of her voice was so sweet and cold it made the hairs on his neck stand up. Isabel stood by the door, not daring to look at either of them. "Mateo, I have a problem in my house," said Eloísa, maintaining total calm. "A problem that you and my daughter have created." Mateo lifted his head for an instant, searching for Isabel, but returned his gaze to the floor. Terror invaded him. He knew that by law he was lost. He could be mutilated or killed for daring to touch his mistress's daughter. "What happened last night was a mistake, mistress. I take the blame." No. Eloísa interrupted him with a wave of her hand. "We're not going to play the blame game, Mateo. We're going to play the survival game. And in this game, I make the rules." She pointed to Isabel, who was still trembling. "My daughter, through her madness, has put my honor at risk. You, through your audacity, have put your life at risk." She made a dramatic pause. "I could punish you both, but I've decided that scandal is more costly than disobedience. Therefore, we're going to make an arrangement." Mateo frowned, confused. "An arrangement?" "Isabel," said Eloísa, addressing her daughter but not taking her eyes off. "Mateo, it's clear you need something I can't give you. You need comfort. and that comfort you found in the arms of this man who, although he's my property, seems to have the strength you seek. Then her gaze returned to Mateo, and that's when the monstrous proposal came from her lips. Mateo, you are mine. You're part of the house, and you must serve the house in all the ways I determine. If my daughter needs you to maintain calm, and therefore maintain the family's secret and honor, then you will serve her. Isabel lifted her head, a spark of hope and shame mixed. She was going to allow it. But, continued Eloísa, and this word cut the air like a whip, if my property is being used for such delicate purposes, I, as owner, have the right to claim what is mine. She stood and walked slowly around the desk, approaching Mateo. Last night, when I saw you both, I didn't feel only rage, Mateo. I felt envy. Envy of the tenderness you offered my daughter. A tenderness that I, the respectable widow, have forgotten exists. She placed a gloved hand on his shoulder. Mateo tensed. The arrangement is this. The secret is maintained. You will continue serving Isabel so she doesn't commit the stupidity of seeking another man who would bring us ruin. Her hand slid down his arm. But from now on you will also serve me, Mateo, in the same ways you serve my daughter. You're my property, and I decide how my property is used. Isabel gasped. Her mother wasn't just forgiving the sin, she was institutionalizing it. And worse, she was sharing it. Mateo couldn't believe what he was hearing. His life, which was destined for the whip or sail, suddenly became complicated in a way beyond any nightmare. He was trapped between the passion he felt for Isabel and the terror of his mistress. "Do you understand, Mateo?" asked Doña Eloísa. Her voice was sweet, but the power behind it was absolute. "If you accept this arrangement, your life is safe. If you refuse, or if you try to flee, or if you tell this to a single soul, I will destroy you and Isabel too." There was no choice. It was slavery or death. "Understood, mistress," Mateo bowed. "I will do as you command." Doña Eloísa withdrew her hand from his shoulder, satisfied. She had won. She had converted the threat of dishonor into a tool of control and personal desire. The new regime was established in the Villamizar house with the precision of a broken clock. During the day, life was identical. Eloísa on her balcony, Isabel in the salon, Mateo managing the cart. But night was a dance of shadows and whispers. Doña Eloísa, to everyone's surprise, began to bloom. The morning remained rigorous, but her skin seemed smoother, her step lighter. Tia Clara commented one morning that the widow had the air of a newlywed. Eloísa attributed it to good management of the inheritance, but in reality, it was the adrenaline of the secret and the liberation of her desire. The problem was the emotional triangle that had formed. Isabel saw her mother with a mixture of horror and envy. Her love for Mateo, which had been pure and rebellious, was now stained by her mother's participation. She looked for him during the day, but Mateo was a ghost. He avoided her eyes, knowing that the slightest sign of affection could cost them their lives. One afternoon, Isabel couldn't take it anymore. She waited for Mateo in the garden behind a hedge of jasmine. "Mateo," she whispered, her voice full of tears, "you don't love me anymore. She has forced you to leave me." Mateo stopped, looking at the ground. "Miss Isabel, please don't put me in danger. You know the rules. My mother's rules are a perversion," exclaimed Isabel. "How can you serve her? She's cold, she's cruel. I love you." Mateo lifted his head. His eyes were deeply sad. "Your mother is my mistress, Isabel. She's the one who keeps us alive. What she wants, she takes, and what I do so that you stay safe." "But what about us?" Mateo breathed deeply. "The courtyard is a memory, miss. Now there's only obedience, and the mistress's obedience comes first." That night, Isabel's pain turned to resentment. She understood that her mother had not only stolen her lover, but had stolen her own emotional freedom. Doña Eloísa managed the schedule with an iron hand. The widow had converted their lives into a perverse competition for attention, a competition Mateo couldn't afford to lose. But the real danger didn't come from Isabel's jealousy or Eloísa's tyranny. The danger came from the street. Don Rafael de la Vega, a cacao merchant, had been courting Doña Eloísa formally for almost a year. He saw the Villamizar house and fortune as the perfect complement to his own businesses. But since Mateo had entered her life, The idea of marrying the tedious and predictable Don Rafael had become unbearable. One Tuesday afternoon, Don Rafael visited the house. While they conversed, he noticed something odd. "Your slave Mateo," he continued, looking toward the courtyard. "He's an excellent man, strong, but I must say I see him tired." Eloísa felt a chill in her stomach. "Mateo is very efficient, but I see him distracted," said Don Rafael. "And you know, Eloísa, that young and strong slaves, if given too much freedom, can become problematic." When Don Rafael left, Eloísa felt the pressure of the outside world. The secret wasn't just an internal matter. It was a weakness that enemies could exploit. The opportunity for escape came on an August night when the sky opened over Cartagena in a biblical deluge. Mateo and Isabel had been planning for weeks, communicating with furtive glances and tiny notes. While Eloísa slept, satisfied after summoning Mateo to her room, he slipped into the study. With trembling hands, he opened the safe behind Don Fernando's portrait. Inside was gold, jewels, documents. He took only the gold, enough to buy freedom and a new life far from Cartagena. In the main hallway, Isabel waited. She was dressed in simple clothes, carrying only a cloth bag with water and bread. "Do you have it?" she whispered. Mateo nodded, showing the heavy bag of coins. "Let's go now." They fled through the back courtyard door, the same door that had witnessed their forbidden love. They ran to the stable. Mateo had prepared the fastest horse, a black stallion. They mounted together. Isabel clung to Mateo, feeling the heat of his body and the promise of freedom. They galloped through the flooded courtyard, through the back gate Mateo left open as a final gesture of defiance. They rowed toward the port, seeking a ship that could take them off the coast before dawn. Morning arrived not with a hammer blow, but with an ominous silence. Doña Eloísa woke late. She dressed in her rigorous mourning, feeling truly in control of her destiny. She went down to breakfast. Isabel wasn't there. "Tia Clara," called Eloísa, "tell Mateo to prepare the cart." Tia Clara returned with confusion on her wrinkled face. "Mistress, the stable is open, and the black stallion isn't there, neither is Mateo." Eloísa's coffee stuck in her throat. Her heart lurched. "What are you saying? And Miss Isabel's bed hasn't been touched." In that moment, Eloísa's world stopped. She ran to the study. She saw the portrait of Don Fernando slightly crooked. She pushed it aside. The safe was open, empty. The gold, the jewels, everything was gone. Doña Eloísa Villamizar stood in the middle of her study, surrounded by the account books that had given her a false sense of security. She had been deceived. She had handed the key to her fortune to her slave, thinking she was controlling him. "They've fled," she screamed. "Mateo has taken my daughter and my fortune. Call the guard." The news fell on Cartagena like delayed thunder. The widow Villamizar, the Iron Woman, had been stripped by her own slave and worse, by her own daughter. Don Rafael, upon hearing, felt a mixture of triumph and fury. Using his contacts at the port and the guard, he ensured the pursuit was relentless. The Colonial Guard found traces quickly. The black stallion was found abandoned on the outskirts of the city, near a clandestine dock. Mateo and Isabel hadn't gone to the main port, but to a secret cove. They had paid a captain of a small schooner bound for the Dutch islands to take them out before dawn. When Don Rafael and the guard arrived at the dock, the sun was already high. They saw the schooner, barely a white dot on the blue Caribbean horizon. They had escaped by hours. "They've escaped!" shouted Don Rafael, frustrated. In the Villamizar house, the widow collapsed. The rumors flew, magnified by scandal. People didn't talk about theft. They talked about forbidden passion, about the slave who had been the lover of mother and daughter, and who had used the knowledge they gave him to secure his freedom. Eloísa, the woman who had lived for reputation, found herself at the center of a hurricane of gossip. The public blow she had given Mateo in the market turned against her. People said, of course, she punished him by day and used him by night. Doña Eloísa Villamizar, the respectable widow, became a pariah. Without her daughter, without her fortune, and with her reputation in tatters, she was forced to sell properties to pay debts. The mourning she wore was no longer armor. It was a shroud. She sat on her balcony, fanning herself with slow, empty movements, but now she wasn't observing life. She was observing her own misery. She had traded her honor for brief and perverse control, and she had lost everything. Meanwhile, on the schooner sailing south, Isabel and Mateo embraced. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with the euphoria of freedom. They arrived in Curaçao, an island under Dutch rule, where slavery laws were different and Eloísa's gold was enough to start over. Mateo, using the knowledge his mistress had given him, established himself as a minor merchant at the port. He was no longer Mateo the slave. He was a free man with a sharp mind, and a woman by his side who loved him. Isabel never looked back. She had traded her golden cage for uncertainty, but that uncertainty came with Mateo's hand, strong and steady. Their love, born in the darkness of the Cartagena courtyard and perverted by her mother's tyranny, finally bloomed under the sun of freedom. It was never known for certain what Mateo thought about Doña Eloísa, whether he felt resentment or saw her simply as the unwitting instrument of his liberation. The only certainty is that the widow, in her eagerness for control, had given him the education, the money, and the opportunity to break his chains. And so ends the story of the widow of Cartagena, who tried to share her slave to save her honor and ended up losing everything. In 1843, the law of men was strong, but the cunning of a slave who learned to read the numbers and the courage of a desperate daughter proved that desire, when it becomes power, can be the sweetest and most destructive poison of all. The Villamizar house fell silent, and the echo of the thunder of their escape was the only sound that reminded Cartagena of the terrible price of secrets.